When things get chaotic, it's just human nature to look for patterns, right? To try and find some kind of meaning. But what happens when a conflict happening right now seems to line up almost perfectly with a prophecy from decades ago? That's what we're diving into today. We're going to look at why this really chilling prediction from a mystic who's been gone for years is suddenly all over the headlines, and what it could possibly mean for all of us. Just listen to this for a second. Missiles being intercepted, explosions going off, unrest at the borders, a rising death toll. It sounds like something straight out of a movie, doesn't it? But it's not. This is what's happening on the ground right now. It's a snapshot of a world that feels like it's on a knife's edge. And this chaos, this uncertainty, well, it's the perfect backdrop for a story that is about to get very, very strange. Okay, so let's talk about what's going on. It really feels like the whole world is just holding its breath, you know? And if you look at where all that tension is coming from, where everyone's eyes are anxiously fixed, it's all pointing to the escalating conflict in the Middle East. And look, this isn't some distant, abstract problem we're talking about. This is happening as we speak, and it is escalating fast. In fact, this conflict has already been raging for 5 pretty intense days, and it's making the whole global situation feel, well, deeply unstable. So, what was the spark? What lit this fuse? Well, it was a massive escalation. We're talking about U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran, strikes that killed the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, along with other really key figures. An event like that, it doesn't just make waves. It's more like a tsunami of instability that just washes over the entire region. And, of course, a move that big was never going to go unanswered. As you'd expect, Tehran hit back almost immediately. They launched their own counterstrikes aiming right at American and Israeli assets. So what we're seeing is this really dangerous back and forth, this tit for tat. And every single time one side makes a move, the stakes just get higher and higher. And get this, think about the language people are using to describe it. The continuing stench of gunpowder hovering over the Middle East. Wow, that's just so evocative, isn't it? It takes you way beyond some sterile news report. It gives you this raw, gritty, almost sensory feeling of what it's actually like on the ground. Okay, so right in the middle of all this very modern 21st century conflict, a really old name is suddenly popping up everywhere. It's like this echo from the past, and you know what? With every single day this conflict goes on, that echo just keeps getting louder. And that name? It's Baba Vanga. Now, if you've never heard of her, she was this blind Bulgarian mystic, a seer who became, well, famous, or maybe infamous, depending on how you look at it, for her predictions about the future. And some of them were chillingly specific. Which really brings us to the main question here, doesn't it? With this very real, very modern crisis unfolding, why on earth is anyone talking about a mystic who's been gone for decades? What's the connection? Why is this prediction, out of all of them, suddenly grabbing everyone's attention? All right, so to really understand what's going on, we have to look at the actual prophecy. We're going to zero in on one of her very specific forecasts, a prediction about a massive war, and crucially, where it was supposed to start. And this is it. This is the heart of the prophecy. She said a conflict would come from the east. And listen, this wasn't going to be some small regional skirmish. No, she said it would be a war that would eventually consume the entire globe within its inferno. Man, those are some seriously chilling words to hear right now, aren't they? Okay, so let's just break down the key pieces here. 1, a huge war. 2, it's a world conflict, not a local one. And 3, it starts in the east. But here's the really important part. Back when she said this, it was totally enigmatic. It didn't make much sense. It was basically a prophecy just waiting for a context to fit into. And, well, this is where we start connecting the dots. Is what's happening right now just a really strange coincidence? Or is this the very context that prophecy has been missing all these years? Are we looking at a coincidence or the start of a catastrophe? And just take a look at this. This is exactly why people are talking. The prophecy said a conflict from the east. The reality is a conflict in the Middle East. The prophecy talked about a massive world conflict. Reality is we're seeing heightened global tension everywhere. The prophecy was enigmatic and uncertain. Our reality today is a deeply, deeply uncertain global environment. When you lay it out side by side like that, the parallels are kind of hard to ignore, right? And look, don't get me wrong, this isn't just some fringe theory bouncing around a corner of the internet. This has become a widespread discussion. This exact question is popping up in countless conversations right now as people, just like us, are trying to make sense of everything that's unfolding. So that leaves us right here with this one big, lingering question. Is this connection we're all seeing just a coincidence? Are we just finding patterns because we're looking for them? Or does Baba Vanga's ominous forecast actually mean that something truly catastrophic is waiting for us all? That's the unsettling question that I think is on everybody's mind right now. Have you ever seen something that's decades old just suddenly pop up and go viral? Well, that's exactly what's happening with a prophecy from a Bulgarian mystic named Baba Vanga, who lived back in the 20th century. Today, we're going to dig into why her name is suddenly all over the internet, right next to searches for a new world war. So you gotta ask, right? Why is someone who passed away way back in 1996 suddenly the center of a massive online buzz about global conflict? The thing is, the answer isn't just about her predictions. It's about what's going on in the world today that's making people search for answers in some pretty unexpected places. And this isn't just some vague feeling people have. No, people are actively typing very specific things into search engines. We're seeing war between Israel and Iran being directly connected to World War III in 2026. It's that specific link that's making everybody dust off these old predictions from Baba Vanga to see if there's a connection. Okay, so what did she actually say that has everyone so hooked? Let's break down the details of this so-called 2026 prophecy. At the absolute heart of all this talk is one single year, 2026. According to how people are interpreting her prophecies, this is the year it all kicks off. A major conflict is supposed to ignite and start this devastating chain reaction across the globe. But what exactly is supposed to happen? Well, the prophecy kind of describes a domino effect. It supposedly starts with one big conflict that just spirals out of control into a full-on world war. And it gets specific, pointing to Europe as the place that gets hit the hardest. Some interpretations even use the word barren to describe the continent afterwards. And of course, from that would come just massive, long-lasting economic and social problems. All right, so we've got the details of this old prophecy. But the real question, the one that matters, is why is it hitting a nerve now? To get that, we need to look at the parallels people are drawing between her predictions and what's happening on the world stage today. So here's how people are connecting the dots. Baba Vanga apparently predicted a major showdown starting somewhere in Eastern Europe. Fast forward to today, and people are looking at the current hostilities between the US and Iran, they're listening to statements coming from the Russian government, and they see the general potential for a US-Russia confrontation, and they're saying, hey, this sounds kind of familiar. But the prediction doesn't just stop with chaos and destruction. No, it actually goes one step further and talks about what the world might look like after all of this. And it suggests a huge shift in who holds all the power. And this might be the most startling part of the whole prophecy. It's what comes after the chaos. According to these interpretations, Russia is predicted to rise from all the turmoil and become the single most dominant power on the planet. But let's be clear on what preeminent really means here. It's not just about being strong. It means surpassing everyone else, being in a league of your own. The prophecy suggests a complete reshuffling of the deck, with one nation rising up to basically call the shots for the rest of the world. So after laying all of this out, the prophecy, the modern connections, the idea of a new world order, we kind of have to take a step back and ask a much bigger question. What does this obsession with a long-gone mystic's words really tell us about ourselves, right here, right now? So what's really going on here? Why is this blowing up? Honestly, it's not about whether the prophecy is true or not. It's about our own uncertainty. When times are tense, when things feel unstable, it's just human nature to look for patterns, to search for answers, to look for any kind of map, even if it's a really speculative one. And that really leaves us with one last big question to think about. When we see these predictions trending and watch people connecting all these dots, are we actually getting a peek through a window into the future? Or are we just looking into a mirror that's showing us our own deep-seated anxieties about the world we live in today? Okay, let's dive into a geopolitical crisis that went from 0 to 100, seemingly overnight. This is all about a race against time, a point of no return, and one single military strike that kicked off a massive chain reaction across the entire Middle East. Let's get right into it. So what was this really all about? Well, it all comes down to one word: immune. That single word was the justification for this whole thing. But what in the world does that actually mean when you're talking about a nuclear program? If you can get your head around this one concept, the rest of the story really starts to click into place. At the very heart of this crisis was a ticking clock. There was this feeling that a point of no return was right around the corner. The fear wasn't just about what Iran was building, but how close they were to making it completely, untouchable. This quote from the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, really just lays it all out there. From his point of view, the window to do anything was slamming shut. The big worry wasn't just Iran having a nuclear program, it was that program becoming totally invulnerable to any kind of attack. And here's exactly what they meant by an immune program. Picture this. You take your most sensitive nuclear and missile facilities, and you bury them deep underground in these super fortified bunkers. The whole idea was, once that stuff is down there, no conventional military strike is going to be able to touch it. It would be, for all intents and purposes, immune. So yeah, that window of opportunity to act, it was seen as closing, and closing fast. Every single day that went by, Iran was getting closer to that point of immunity, and that just kept raising the stakes for everyone.
All right, so with this threat of an immune program hanging over everything, a strike was launched. But how did the leaders who made that call actually justify such a huge move?
Okay, so here you see two reasons that are, related, but also pretty different. Prime Minister Netanyahu was laser focused on a very specific military problem, stopping the program from becoming physically unreachable, immune. President Trump, on the other hand, talked about it in much broader terms, just flat out stopping Iran from getting a nuke, period. It's a subtle difference, but it's important. One is about capability, the other is about the final outcome. Now, an action this big was guaranteed to have consequences. You just knew it. The strike almost immediately triggered a response from Iran. And this, right here, is where the conflict really started to blow up. You can almost see it in slow motion, can't you? This sequence of events is a textbook example of escalation. First, a strike. That leads to a retaliation, and that, in turn, leads to a much wider conflict. Each step just predictably leads to the next, more dangerous one. It's like dominoes falling. And Iran's response, it was not just for show. No way. They came back with serious military hardware. We're talking ballistic missiles and drones. They were sending a very clear, very forceful message that the first strike was not going to be the last word. And just look at where they aimed. This retaliation wasn't just pointed back at Israel. Iran's counterattack was incredibly broad. They targeted U.S. assets and allies all across the Middle East, in Bahrain, the UAE, everywhere. This was the moment the conflict went from being between just a few countries to a full-blown regional crisis. So the end result of this whole rapid-fire chain of events wasn't control. It was just the opposite. The conflict blew up, it got wider, way more unpredictable, and ultimately it put tons of civilians and other people living across the region at much greater risk. And that really brings us to the big central question of this whole mess, doesn't it? It all started as this one calculated move to stop a future threat, but it just spiraled out of control so fast, it really makes you wonder, on the world stage, once that first chess piece is moved, is anyone at all, truly in control of what happens next?